Joining us now is the former head of the Auto Task Force in the Obama administration, Steve Rattner. So, Steve, you've been in the negotiating room before at what was a key moment in the survival of the big three automakers. They were not doing well. As I understand it, you tell me because you were in there and I was not, the union made a lot of concessions. They gave up a lot in their benefits package. The amount of money that new workers were making was far less than the older veteran workers. I think it was about half. Now that these companies are making record profits, now that you've seen CEO pay go up as much as it has, is it fair for them to ask for some of that back?
Sure, it's entirely fair for them to ask some of that back. I would say they have gotten some of that back in the 15 years or so since we rescued the auto companies. But I am very sympathetic to their needs and their desires. The fact is that if you look at auto worker wages in this country over the last 10 or 12 years, they've essentially flatlined after you adjust for inflation, whereas most other workers have gotten something of an increase over that period of time in other industries. The key problem here that you have to recognize is that unlike, say, a UPS driver or an American Airlines pilot, where those jobs aren't going anywhere, in manufacturing and auto specifically we're talking about here, those jobs are mobile in a sense. They can go to the South, where there are many, many factories now operating with non-union workers paid much, much less than the union workers, and then go to Mexico, where recently the number of auto workers in Mexico is higher now than the number of auto workers in the U.S., and where the Detroit Three companies have 20 facilities among them down there making cars with people who are paid literally as little as $8 or $9 a day. And so the yin and the yang of this, so to speak, is that the more the workers make, the possibility is that there'll be fewer jobs, and there needs to be a balance on behalf of both sides for this to work.
I don't want to be Pollyanna here, but the companies have a choice on whether to keep the plants here or to move them to the South or to Mexico, where they make less dollars. I just am stuck on what the union conceded to help keep these companies afloat, and this idea that we helped you in your time of need. We feel like now that everything is going so well, and it's clearly going quite well, that we should share in that profitability. We should share in that hard work done over the past 15 years. Goldman Sachs researchers modeled what a 40% raise would cost. I'll put the numbers up on the screen. They project a 40% raise for workers would cost between $4 billion to $6 billion over 4 years for GM and Ford. They didn't model Stellantis. General Motors gross profit last year was $22.344 billion. That's a 32% increase. Brian said that a moment ago. Ford, their profit, $25.5 billion, a 9%, give or take, increase over 12 months. With numbers like that, what can the companies reasonably afford to give the workers while still maintaining the money that they need, and this is key, to develop and to innovate on electric vehicles where they have a whole lot of competition?
Well, as your figures implied, and I wouldn't argue with them, the amount that the unions are asking for relative to the profits is not life-threatening by any stretch of the imagination. I certainly get that. Labor is only one relatively small part of the cost of making a car. So yes, you can pay labor more and still make a car. Nonetheless, in our capitalistic society, for better or worse, companies are tasked with essentially keeping costs as low as possible. And if costs in the Midwest to make cars goes up too much, those jobs will move, whether they can afford to keep them in the Midwest or not. Unless you somehow legislate it, they will move. And then again, I don't want to sound like I'm here as a spokesman for the companies. I'm certainly not. I'm sympathetic to both sides. But I would also point out that General Motors stock hasn't moved at all, really, since it went public more than a decade ago. So the shareholders of General Motors have not lost money, but they haven't made any money in the last 10 years either, which is because this is a tough business, as we have all learned over the years.
Steve, what about politics? If they do walk out and there's 145,000 people on strike in the upper Midwest, the Rust Belt, the Blue Wall, how threatening is that for a re-election for President Biden?
Not great. It's obviously not great. It's not great for a couple of reasons. First, for the political reasons you talk about. Secondly, there would be an economic impact, and we're still in a somewhat fragile economic recovery, and we don't want to jeopardize that. And so the president is in a somewhat awkward position here because he has described himself fairly as being very pro-union, and I certainly also think of myself as pro-union. But on the other hand, he needs to get this strike resolved. And so I think you're going to see, I've already seen the White House, at least behind the scenes, trying their best to try to bring these two sides together. And I think they're going to try their hardest to do that because the political consequences are tough. The president's in an awkward position on this.
Do you think it gets resolved before midnight?
I would probably take the under on that. General Motors made a new offer very recently, last hour or two, which is the best one they made yet, closer. But it feels like there's not a lot of time left to really wrap this up by 11:59 tonight.